So today we're talking about perfection, and Dr. Reverend James Gaither is our presenter. A little bit about him. He's an ordained minister and has been since 1979. He has a master's in philosophy and a doctorate in theology. He's taught at the Unity Ministerial and Spiritual Education programs for over 25 years. He's also served as the president of Polos University Graduate Seminary and director of academic and student affairs for Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute. He's published a couple of books, The Essential Charles Fillmore and The Hidden Realm of God, The Historical Jesus and His Healing Philosophy. He's also giving a seminar starting next week in Gladstone, and there's information about how to get to that in the chat here. So if anybody's interested, they can click on that. So with that, I turn it over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Dennis. Good to be here again with y'all, and look forward to sharing with you, and hope that you get some value from presentation. Topic is perfection. I'm sure you've heard, maybe you've said this yourself, nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. That the universe is imperfect. And you've probably also heard people say that everything is perfect. And again, it could also be the case that some things are perfect and other things are imperfect. Which view is correct? Which perspective is true partly depends on what one means by perfect. One of the meanings of perfect is just complete. So in that respect, the universe is complete. There's nothing missing that we know of. So in that sense, the universe is perfect. Another meaning is perfect is to be without mistakes or errors. Again, I take it there are no mistakes in the universe. People make mistakes. So a case could be made that while the universe as a whole is perfect, people are imperfect because they make mistakes. It doesn't really matter which answer is correct. After all, things are what they are, regardless of whether we call them perfect or imperfect, right? So what we think about the universe affects how we experience life. Those who think of the universe and themselves as imperfect or even bad can experience some depression around that. They may even become suicidal. But if we think of the universe as imperfect, we also have reason to doubt, for example, the idea of God, that God is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and good. If we think of the universe as perfect, on the other hand, we have good reason to be happy. If the universe is perfect, then we have reason to believe that God is good, omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence. Clearly, those who see the universe as perfect can live optimistically. Now, I'm in the Unity tradition, as you heard, in New Thought. Affirming perfection is part of how we pray for healing. We may affirm something like, I am a perfect child of God, or I am an expression of divine perfection. Is perfection just a matter of opinion? If so, it would seem that for practical purposes, you might as well hold the opinion that makes you the happiest. After all, if thinking the universe is perfect and that you are perfect makes you happy, you might as well do that. Spiritual teachers, philosophers, scientists, theologians have all weighed in with their opinions about perfection. Well, today I want to make a case for the belief that the universe is perfect. And not only the universe is perfect, but you are perfect. I'm going to begin with some thoughts of a brilliant scientist who thought of the universe as imperfect. One of our most brilliant scientists who cheerfully affirmed the imperfection of the universe was Stephen Hawking. Hawking said one of the basic rules of the universe is that nothing is perfect. Perfection simply doesn't exist. Without imperfection, neither you nor I would exist. Now, in the context in which he said this, what Hawking meant by imperfection, as he described it, was irregularity. Specifically, I'm going to get a little scientific on you here. Specifically, he meant that the irregular distribution of gas in the earliest universe allowed gravity to pull gases together to form stars and other celestial bodies, including, of course, the Earth. Without those irregularities, gas evenly distributed in space would mean no stars, no planets, no you, no me. So, in saying that perfection doesn't exist, Hawking just meant that at the beginning of the physical universe, there were some irregularities in the distribution of gas molecules. Now, brilliant as Hawking was, and as inspiring as he was, I cannot quite accept that perfection means the regular, even distribution of gas molecules in a universe without stars, planets, and people, which is sort of the implication of what he said. Another one of the most brilliant people in the 20th century was Kurt Gödel. Uh, he affirmed that the world is perfect. And I think he made the best logical case for the perfection of the universe. Kurt Gödel is regarded by scientists and mathematicians and philosophers as one of the most significant logicians, mathematicians, and philosophers in history. His proofs made major contributions to mathematics and the philosophy of mathematics, major contributions to in the area of logic and in physics. However, they're too technical to go into here, and I'm not sure I understand them well enough to explain them anyway. I bring him up as an example of a genius in the 20th century who made a case for the perfection of the universe. Gödel thought of perfection as beauty, order, harmony, balance, certainty, and other characteristics of the laws of universe, and more specifically of the characteristics of mathematics. He wrote, mathematics has a form of perfection. We may expect that the conceptual world is perfect, and furthermore, that objective reality is beautiful, good, and perfect. Went on to say we should judge reality by the little which we truly know of it, since that part which conceptually we know, sorry, that part which we conceptually know fully turns out to be so beautiful, the real world of which we know so little should also be beautiful. Gödel had some other interesting beliefs that he arrived at through his logic and understanding of the universe. One of the things he said is that the world is rational. That another thing he said was that concepts have an objective existence. Concepts have an objective existence. In other words, ideas are real. And another thing he said is that materialism is false. So he fits in that category of idealist metaphysicians and philosophers. And finally, he said the world in which we live is not the only one in which we shall live or have lived. So he was a believer in reincarnation in a sense. Well, I'm personally convinced that Gödel was right about the perfection of the universe. Events in the universe conform to balance, order, harmony, and the beauty of mathematical truths and physical laws. I think that's a reasonable idea of perfection. You see on the slide here examples of mathematical structures in nature. Up in the upper left is what's called the Fibonacci spiral. It's based on the idea of the structure of the golden rectangle, which is thought to have was thought by the ancients to be like a perfect form. And it turns out that there's a specific proportionality, if you will, of the golden rectangle. And if you create a spiral within it, you see that in the picture at the top. What you see is that nature imitates that spiral you see in those other pictures. And another example is how, just another example, how the shape of snowflakes imitates the tiling of hexagons. You see the tiling of the hexagons and the snowflake there. So these are illustrations of how nature imitates or conforms to various sorts of mathematical formulas and geometric formulas and so on. Now, convinced as I am of the idea of perfection, I'm also convinced that not every event is inherently predictable. So not every event is strictly determined. That there are no laws, for example, that determine and predict human behavior the way that we can, for example, predict motions of inanimate objects. Humans, like quantum events, are undetermined, or one might say underdetermined. I conclude that humans have freedom of choice and that our choices are not determined by physical laws. Now, freedom of choice is as much a part of the perfection of the universe as the universal laws and orders, that freedom is just as important for perfection as predictability is, which is what science strives for, predictability. And I believe this is true, that this freedom of choice is part of perfection, even if we use our freedom to make foolish choices. After all, we can learn and grow from foolish choices. It's not necessary to understand the philosophy and logic of mathematics to understand the idea of perfection as it's found in mysticism. Mystic understanding of perfection is essentially that there is an absolute unity of all things, and that the divine is present in all things. Mystics of the East and the West affirm the omnipresence of the divine. They affirm that all things are mirrors, appearances, or emanations of an ultimately good source, of a divine reality. One text that I especially like is found in the Buddhist classic called the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra, it says, "One in all in one. If only this were realized, no more worry about your not being perfect." In other words, once you realize that reality is an absolute unity, you realize that you are perfect. So you don't have to worry about being imperfect. We live in a perfect universe where and in that universe, it is the case that there's one in all in one. I'm convinced that the mystics are right about the perfection of the universe and the underlying unity and presence of the divine in all things. Well, there's another related question to this discussion of perfection. Suppose we grant for a moment that the universe as a whole is perfect in this sort of mathematical sense, if nothing else. Does that mean that every human is also perfect? Question still sort of hangs out there, doesn't it? And this is where we get hung up as human beings. Even if we don't care what scientists, mathematicians, philosophers, theologians, and mystics have to say about the perfection of the universe, we may still want to be perfect, whatever our understanding of that is. Being perfect, doing things perfectly, is more important to some people than to others, but most people feel dissatisfied with what they see as their failings, their character flaws, weaknesses, their mistakes. And so we might be tempted, and often perhaps do, to dismiss our shortcomings simply by saying, well, nobody's perfect. But even then, if we can just sort of casually dismiss our mistakes by saying nobody's perfect, even then, our imagined shortcomings and mistakes may secretly bug us. Now, you may be familiar with the Enneagram system. You see over here the slide, the Enneagram, which identifies or is partly based on the idea of 9 basic personality types. And among those personality types is the perfectionist. You see that labeled with the number 1 there, perfectionist. So in the Enneagram system of personality types, a perfectionist is a type of person, right? And one of the things about the Enneagram, by the way, is that you see those lines, the 9 lines. That's why it's called an Enneagram. Ennea means 9. The 9 lines connect from one point to another. And so the idea here is that our personality, in a sense, is fluid. So even though we may be primarily a perfectionist, if you follow lines, we might, in some circumstances, um, display the characteristics of a romantic, number 4 there, or of an enthusiast, number 7, and so on. Anyway, so the Enneagram says a perfectionist is a type of personality. In psychology, though, mainstream psychology, perfectionism is actually a psychological trait that people may have rather than a personality type. Perfectionism, like most personality traits, can be helpful or hurtful depending on the circumstances. I would say that being perfect doesn't mean that we have no room for growth and improvement. And so our basic ideas of what it means to be perfect are somewhat flawed. Being perfect doesn't mean we have no room for growth and improvement. From a metaphysical and mystical perspective, our substance and essence is the absolute one, the absolute good. In short, we are essentially and substantially perfect and divine. What we experience and express are the infinite possibilities and potentialities of divinity, of the divine one. In any given time interval, we only partially express our divine potential. There is always more to express because the absolute, as the mystics say, is infinite. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that I believe, that I'm convinced that we have free will, because infinity is an undetermined number, which means it makes perfect sense in a mathematical universe that there should be some things that are undetermined, and therefore there is freedom. Now, there is a difference between being perfect, which I'm claiming that we all are, and realizing that perfection. Realizing in the sense of attaining a certain kind of fulfillment that we can describe as realizing or knowing or experiencing perfection. Jesus the Christ and Gautama the Buddha both associated realizing perfection or enlightenment with universal compassion, or as you might say, a consciousness of universal oneness, universal compassion. They did not associate it with being ideal physical specimens. They did not associate it with always being right. For Jesus and Gautama, right conduct or perfection is conduct rooted in universal compassion. This is the way to realize our perfection, or to follow a path of right action in both Christianity and Buddhism. It is to attain this consciousness of universal compassion. There's only one recorded saying of Jesus that specifically mentions the idea of being perfect. It's found in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke. This is the passage: love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. You, therefore, must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, according to this passage, Jesus' idea of realizing perfection is choosing to love unconditionally. That is how we realize the divine unity and perfection. That is how we make it real in our consciousness. As mentioned, the Gospel of Luke has a similar passage. Though both the saying in Luke and Matthew were probably based on the same list of sayings that was produced very early by Jesus' disciples. We do not know which version is the original or closest to the original. But here's the way we find it in Luke. Love your enemies. It goes on to talk about the sun and the rain, of course. Love your enemies, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the selfish. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Or in some translations, it says compassionate. Now, why does Matthew say be perfect while Luke says be merciful? I believe the difference in those translations is a difference resulting from translating the same Aramaic or Hebrew word with different Greek words. So, in other words, Matthew and Luke both translating in a Greek text words that were originally spoken in Aramaic or Hebrew. Thing to keep in mind that's sometimes forgotten is that Jesus's followers, the people he spoke to, were a mix of Jews and Gentiles. So he encountered Romans, he encountered Greeks, as well as people who lived in the area of Galilee, people who were native there. Most people back then had to communicate in Greek sometimes because it was the language of business and government. So while Jesus no doubt spoke Aramaic, especially to his fellow Galileans, he no doubt spoke Aramaic, he would have had to also speak Greek to interact with people in his region. I suspect the saying about being like God was spoken in Greek except for one Aramaic or Hebrew word. That's the word that was translated as either perfect or merciful. Now, it's not that, when you think about it, it's not that unusual even today to use words or phrases from another language. For example, an English speaker might say something like, she has a she has a certain je ne sais quoi. You heard that expression? Je ne sais quoi. I don't know what, right? So we might use these phrases and words from other languages when we're speaking in English. So what I believe is that Jesus used the Hebrew word or the Aramaic equivalent, shalem, where Matthew where Matthew has the word perfect and Luke has the word merciful, they're both translating the Hebrew word shalem. And I suspect that because the word shalem can be translated as perfect, complete, but also friendly, peaceable, compassionate. So, in the very word, there's this linkage of the ideas of being peaceable, friendly, loving, complete, perfect. And by the way, shalom is etymologically linked in Hebrew to the words shalom and Jerusalem. The Hebrew or Aramaic word conveyed then both perfection and compassion somehow in one word. And so, what I believe happened here is that Matthew and Luke made different choices for translating the Aramaic or Hebrew into Greek. But the main point, of course, that I want to make is that this idea is almost built into the native language of Jesus and certainly into this saying. The point is that to love universally is to realize divine perfection. Now, the perfection of the universe is, in part, as Gödel noted, its conformity to mathematical principles and laws of physics. Mathematical truths and scientific laws are eternally complete and unchanging. They are what philosophers call necessary truths. The world is constantly changing, but it changes in accord with that perfection. And so it has both these qualities of harmony and balance, order, the mathematical side, but also because mathematics itself has an element of indetermination, it also has this freedom, this possibility for change, this possibility for process. And so I believe that the universe and the world is constantly changing in accord with perfection, that change is a part of it. Scientists often call the laws of the universe the mind of God. They say they're looking for the mind of God. That means they're looking for these laws. But I say that God mind is not just the laws, but also the evolving perceptions of the world in harmony with those laws. God in us knows the unchanging principles of the universe and perceives the changes in the universe as infinite mind. All the mind there is this infinite mind which expresses which expresses individually through us as unique perspectives. So God is perceiving the world through us. God in us is the principle of infinite love, and God in us is the expansion of love in our consciousness, the process of realizing perfection. The universe is a process of becoming, not a static crystallized state. The perfection of the universe includes the process of becoming, just as it includes this idea of free will. Think about music for a moment. Music can be written on an unchanging page, but it, of course, is more than a single static image. Here you see the image of the sheet music for Also Sprach Zarathustra, which is more commonly known, I think, in our culture as the theme from 2001 Space Odyssey. Think of those timpani drums going, right? But this is what it looks like. This is how it's conveyed from generation to generation, this sheet of music that you see in the left, right? And that, by the way, that all that music is mathematical when you think about it. It's got beats per measure, it's got quarter notes, whole notes, half notes, it's got a time signature. All of this stuff is mathematical, right? And on a sheet of music, it looks very static. But if you look at the picture on the left there, it's a conductor actually leading the orchestra and playing Thus Sprach Zarathustra, or the theme from 2001. So music can be written on this unchanging page, but it's more than that image. The full value of sheet music is using it to play a symphony or a song. Music is not a solid state, but a burning fire, a movement in the air. It is energy that flows through mind and body and conveys that movement and that motion and that rhythm to us as we listen to it or as we play it. Perfection of music is in its process as well as in its composition. A musician may make mistakes in learning to play a piece, maybe even after they've learned it. But that's part of the process of learning music. Likewise, life is a process, not a static state. A life is a perfect process, perfect in every moment, as perfect in later years as in middle years and at birth, as perfect in the lows as in the highs. You are as perfect now as when you were born, as perfect as in any moment of your life, and you will continue to be perfect forever. You're in this eternal process of perfection. So perfection is not a static state of being, but a perpetual process of becoming. So everybody is perfect, but their perfection changes. Even villains perfectly illustrate free choice, and they motivate others to be perfectly heroic. As a friend of mine used to say, saying that I've cherished in my heart for many, many years, that everybody is good for something, if only a bad example. And even villains can become heroic and kind during the process of their unfoldment. Now, in some cases, that can happen within a lifetime, and in some cases, it might take multiple lifetimes. As Gödel suggested, we've lived in other worlds. But you are now the perfect you for this moment, and you are perfection in process. This does not mean that you need not change. It means instead that you are continually changing, and that changing is perfect. Oh, pardon me. I'm scrolling stuff all weird here. Okay, where were we? We were here. Okay. Sorry. Slideshows. Okay. So, what I conclude is that I urge you to accept the fact that the universe is perfect and you are part of that perfection. I urge you to accept the fact that there is in God mind a perfect idea for you. And that idea includes peace, joy, love, wisdom, health, success, abundance. Accept the fact that your mind is God mind in you. Your perfection is God mind's idea in you. You are a perfect idea unfolding that perfection. Peace, love, wisdom, health, success, all these things that we may seek as human beings, all these things are already within us. They are part of the idea of what we are and what we can become. So perfection, that perfection, however you conceive it, is unfolding as you, through you, right now. And so now we will join together in contemplating that perfection and that truth as Dennis leads us in a
Let's
time of meditation.
yes, let's take this into meditation. I invite you to follow along if you're comfortable, or appreciate it in any way that's right for you at this moment. I suggest closing your eyes, taking a deep breath and letting it out slowly, relaxing into this moment. Picture yourself on your perfect beach. The sand warm under your bare feet, your favorite inflatable in front of you, and you push off into the water, floating weightlessly. And feel the energy of the sun's rays caressing you as you let your mind float into the perfection of your love. Into the perfection of peace. As you feel and appreciate the perfection of joy. As you realize the perfection of everything around you and everything that you think and see and do, the perfection of being. And you allow that truth to penetrate your being as you rest in the silence. And now as you let go of that feeling of perfection in all, come back to the shore, feet in the warm sand, and enjoy the perfection of this moment. And so it is. Amen.